Hello and welcome. In the 3 previous lessons, we focused on methods of creating a website layout. Today we'll review the most important things we learned. First, it's essential to create an organized structure rather than typing everything directly inside the body element. To create this structure, we use the div elements. At the very least, the website should include a header, a navigation, and, of course, a content section. Frequently, you'll also have to add some additional elements. After creating individual sections, you have to place them correctly. When placing your elements, you can use either the float, margin, or position property. Remember that we first specified fixed dimensions in pixels and then positioned the div elements using the margin property. Speaking of positioning, you might have heard about the position property. This property enables either absolute positioning, which moves an element to specified coordinates, or relative positioning, which determines how much will an element move from its original position. Relative positioning may seem easier, but I'll show you why I suggest positioning elements using the margin property. I'll try to position the content section from the previous example using absolute positioning. I'll replace the margin properties with the position property and set the value to absolute. Left navigation is 200 pixels wide, so we have to move the content section 200 pixels to the left. We also have to move it 190 pixels from the top, because the header and the menu have a total height of 190 pixels. Let's look at the result in a browser. As you can see, the content section overlaps the left sidebar. This is because the coordinate system starts at the browser border and not at the border of our layout. That's the reason that we can't use this method here, because each user may have a different screen resolution and browser window size. Theoretically, we could apply absolute positioning if the layout was aligned to the left, but I still can't recommend using it. We can also set the value of the position property to relative. This setting moves an element from its original position by a given number of pixels. Let's go ahead and try it. I'll change the value of the position property to relative. We need to move the div 200 pixels to the right and 400 pixels to the top. As you can see, the content section was placed correctly, but the other parts fell apart. Now I'll delete the margin property of the right sidebar, and you should clearly see the problems that the position property caused. The content section would normally be displayed over here, but the position property moved it by a specified number of pixels. The right sidebar and the footer remained in their original positions. Over here is an empty space where the content section should be. As you can see, this method isn't very efficient because you also have to move all the other sections that follow after the content. You can also set the value of the position property to fixed. I'll show you how it works on the right bar div. I'll add the position property, set the value to fixed, and both coordinates to 100 pixels. Let's view the result in a browser. As you can see, even though I'm scrolling, the right sidebar keeps its position and never moves away. You probably won't use this very often, but it's good to know that it exists. Now that I've shown you all of the positioning methods, you should understand why I recommend using the margin property to position elements. In any case, using either the margin or the float property has a big disadvantage. If you place too much text inside an element positioned in this way, the element won't resize and the text will overflow. This can be solved by adding a scroll bar to the element, but that doesn't look very good. Specifying fixed dimensions should only be used when you know the size of the content in advance. This mostly applies to the header, navigation, and the footer. In these sections, the content is usually static, meaning that it doesn't change much. On the other hand, the advantage is that you can use background pictures that won't distort when you resize the browser window. I also showed you how to position an element using the float property. The greatest advantage of this method is that the element resizes, depending on the amount of content. Keep in mind that this property only enables you to align an element to the left or to the right. In cases when you want to align 3 columns, you may need to use an auxiliary div element, like we did in one of our previous examples. With that method, elements can also resize horizontally. All you need to do is set the width in percentage points. It's a good idea to position elements in this way when they contain larger amounts of text and you expect to be adding more. Every time you add more text, the element will resize automatically. However, avoid using background pictures with this method because they would deform, and you don't want that. As you can see, the best option is probably to use a combination of the positioning methods. For example, you can set fixed dimensions to your header because you know the exact amount of content. It's usually a heading, a logo, or a simple description of the website, which are not likely to change very often. In addition, it looks good when you use a picture as a header background. The navigation can also have fixed dimensions because the number of links probably won't change either. In contrast, the content section should always be fluid because you'll probably be adding new articles regularly and the total amount of content will grow. For this, it's always best to use the float property. Again, the footer dimensions are usually fixed because the footer only contains a small amount of information. These are the basic rules you should stick to, but of course, it always depends on the particular situation. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll look forward to seeing you the next time.